Welcome to the Unfiltered Friends podcast, where we humanize your favorite creators through their personal stories and then learn something from them. I hope you feel inspired by today's guest, and if you do, share it with someone who needs it. So without further ado, here is Unfiltered Friends. Hello, Unfiltered Friends. Today we have on April. This is going to be not intense conversation, but uncover intense subject matters, because she tends to cover these subject matters lightheartedly, even though they are sometimes absolutely abhorrent behavior. So we're going to bring in April. Hello, April.
Hello.
Hi. So I was suggested to you by one of my viewers who is also, would you say that you're like, you have so many labels. Why don't we start with that? You're like X this, X that, but still do that. So like when you tell people like where you are now, what do you say to them?
Yeah, so I would say I'm an ex-evangelical, ex-conservative, or recovering. That's hard to shake.
Recovering.
And I still consider myself a Christian, but very, very progressive. And if you were to ask, the majority of American Christians, if I were a Christian, they would probably tell you no, that, I'm a heretic and all of this stuff. But I still find value in the teachings of Jesus. And so that's kind of, I hold the rest very loosely.
Yeah. I mean, as somebody who wasn't brought up religiously, but my YouTube channel for a decade covered mostly LGBT issues. Like I was in the fight for same-sex marriage in California and then eventually federally. I kept running in to the Bible in every single conversation. And so as someone who wasn't brought up in it, I was able to read the Bible just like a book, like any other book. And I got to the end of it and I was like, where are these ideas coming from?
Yeah.
From these people? They say it's from the Bible, but I just read it and I didn't see almost any of the stuff that they're talking about. What's the disconnect between the teachings in the Bible and what people are using to shame others essentially for just existing?
Yeah, well, it's power, thirst for power, and weaponizing scripture in a way that suits them. Christian nationalism, I think, is pretty much your brand of American Christianity, which was what I come from. And honestly, it was, I get a lot of flack that I'm not a true Christian, but really what I'm not is this Americanized conservative version of Christianity, which is very narrow-minded and very fundamentalist. And I feel like what I'm doing now is actually more in tune with being a Christ follower or following the teachings of Jesus. And it actually took me kind of like what you said, reading the Bible from an objective point of view instead of, being told this is what this means, but taking a step back and being like, no, I'm going to read this for myself and not let a white pastor tell me what I should think about it. And then it was kind of like, well, holy crap, this is not anything like I had been told it was.
Yeah. And that moment has to be pretty sobering because you've had a lifetime of this foundational idea of things. And then you're just like, whoa, I don't know that I agree with this stuff. What was that moment for you where you kind of like looked at the things that you were being taught and looked at what was going on and be like, something is off here?
Yeah, I would say the big moment, the moment that made all the little moments along the way come together and to finally make sense of it all was probably when I saw Christians throw their support behind Donald Trump, and not just support, but championing him,
Yes.
It's
so confusing. How did Donald Trump become a religious figure? I can't think of someone who's more anti a lot of the teachings of the Bible than Donald Trump. Is it just about like abortion rights? Is that basically that's what it feels like from the outside? How can someone who is brought up religiously look at Donald Trump and say this is a religious figure?
So I think it's a bunch of things, and this is something that I've had to like heavily unlearn and dive into because I had the same questions, like how did we get here? So a great book that details the historical transition of white Christianity is Jesus and John Wayne. and it's infuriating by Kristen May.
Okay.
But it really goes like year by year, really starting in the 50s. But even before then, you see slavery in America.
Yeah.
Like, Christians today like to champion like, oh no, it was Christians who were the abolitionists who saved America from slavery. But really, the South used the Bible to justify owning people. And we like to ignore that part. So I think really the disconnect is just power. And white supremacy is deeply ingrained in American Christianity, and most people don't realize that because it's really it's ingrained in the country, not just the church. But
Yeah.
the church was such a vital part, is still a vital part of the shift. So like something that I didn't know, I'm probably getting off topic because this is a
It's
huge
okay.
topic.
Yeah.
Something I didn't realize until I read Jesus and John Wayne was that In God We Trust was not on the money, like legally, like told like this has to be on all of our money until the 1950s. And Under God was not put into the Pledge of Allegiance until the 1950s. And it was part of like Billy Graham coming together with Dwight Eisenhower to fight godless communism in the Cold War. But that's kind of starts this transition of marrying republicanism to this version of Christianity, where now you're not fighting political parties. It's not about politics. It's about good versus evil. And it can be really hard to go against someone who thinks that they're on a holy mission and that if they don't stop evil demon rats from coming into power, that more people are going to die and go to hell, or God's going to, judge America. Because there's also this patriotic belief in Christian nationalism that is that like America is God's chosen country in a sense, and that God gave us favor in all of the wars, and that's why we won, and we have these like miracles, and so it's like this combination of white supremacy mixed in with Christian nationalism and patriotism that's all wrapped up together, and it can be a hard pillar to knock down because they all are just so interconnected, and it can be hard to spot exactly where each one starts and each one ends.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just kind of went on a tangent there.
No, it's hard to have. And the thing is I'm somebody like when I was doing a lot of conversations about the LGBTQ community, I would sit and talk to people who were bigoted. I would talk to people who were homophobic, transphobic. I wouldn't make content around it because I didn't want to feature them, but I found that I stopped having the conversations because there was no conversation to be had. Like I could not have a successful back and forth because the way that they felt was the only correct way, and no amount of logical information or good back and I actually lost one of my closest friends over the issue of pro-life versus pro-choice. And I was trying to explain to her, and I was like, okay, and very logically, I was like, what is your purpose for being pro-life? And she's like, I want to save more children. I don't want abortions to happen. I was like, okay, but what if I told you that when you outlaw abortion, more babies die and more mothers die? And it was just silence. And I was like, if your purpose is to save, then what you're doing is causing more damage. Well, they just wash their hands of it. And I found that even with someone who I've known since I was 15 years old, I couldn't have, it was heartbreaking because I want to be able to talk to people, but there's such an idea that the way that they think is the only correct way to think, that it doesn't, the mental gymnastics to make whatever logical argument you have invalid is almost impressive at times.
Yes, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, and especially when it creates an echo chamber, because I mean, I was on that side. I genuinely believed that abortion was murder. But when you're in these circles, I was never once taught like a democratic view of abortion, that it was healthcare. I had never heard any stories of how it had saved women's lives. Pretty much the only version of abortion that I had been told was that it was full-term abortion. Women were like waiting their entire pregnancy and then decided that they just wanted to kill a healthy baby, and they were healthy and they had no other reason for it other than being maniacal. And, like that's the version that you're told. And honestly, like, it's hard to argue against that because like, yeah, like I don't, that it's, they think it's like a baby comes out and doctors just kill the baby.
Which is not true. It's just not true.
No, it's not true. But I never heard the other side of that. And so it's like, it would be hard. And not only did I not hear the other side, but I was taught that, they'll try to tell you it's about women's rights, but really that's a satanic scheme because the devil comes as an angel of light. And so you're constantly demonizing any outside thought and being told that your thought is the one true thought. And if you get pushback, it's because they use the verse where Jesus says, like, the world will hate you as it hated me. And so it's just any pushback that you get for saying these really bigoted and discriminatory things just further proves that you're on the right side because you're getting hatred like Jesus. When in reality, you're not getting hatred like Jesus. You're getting hatred because you're an asshole.
You are being a horrible person,
right?
Which to me, like, is anti the word. Which is I think that's where I get confused. Is I'm able to be objective, but you were less so because your indoctrination into this mindset starts very young. Like, what was it like for you as a kid in a household that taught these things? Like, what were you being taught, and how young were you being taught those things?
Oh, from birth. Like, I don't ever remember not believing any of it. It was just, my dad was a pastor and an evangelist. My grandfather was a pastor. And I will say, like, my parents were good people that were just also taught these things. So it's kind of a vicious cycle that unless you break it, you don't have any reason, especially as white people, we don't have any reason to unlearn this stuff because what we're perpetuating keeps us in power. So, we're in our nice little privileged bubble. I don't need to question if this is right or wrong because I'm comfortable.
You're not affected by it. When people say things like, I don't think about race. And I was like, yes, that's your privilege to not think about race.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was taught not to see color. That
talk. Like, when someone says I don't see color, I was like, shut up. I'm white. They're black. They're brown. Get over it. Just don't be racist.
Oh, yeah. We were like, if you brought up color, that was actually what was racist.
Oh my God.
But that wasn't like a huge part of it. So like, I would say like growing up, I don't remember it getting very political until probably I was like a teenager. Like, I'm sure we were, but it wasn't really on my mind, but I did believe in the rapture, from a very young age. Do you know what the rapture is?
What is the rapture?
The rapture is this belief that at any moment, Jesus is going to come back, not all the way to earth, but kind of in the clouds, and a giant trumpet will sound, and all of the Christians on earth will get sucked up into the sky to join Jesus. And basically it's like a get out of death free card, and you just get to go to heaven. And then after the rapture, if you're left behind, it starts a 7-year great tribulation where the first 3.5 years are peaceful, but the second 3.5 years are full of bloodshed and violence. And that's when the Antichrist like really cranks up his evilness, and the mark of the beast comes in. And then at the end of the 7 years, Jesus and God come back with all the Christians that had previously died or been raptured, and just like wipes out 2/3 of the earth, and then starts a 1,000-year reign with a new earth. And saying it out loud sounds really crazy, but this is like just very common knowledge. And
it's just stressful. And you're teaching children about this?
Yes. I will say initially, early in my childhood, I was excited about it. I didn't fully understand death and the idea that, God killing all these people in the Great Tribulation or at the end of it was like, I didn't fathom that like these were like regular people that I would know. These were like evil people, because you'd have to be really evil to be left behind. It's a very simplistic way of thinking. But as I got older, it turned from this like excitement to go to heaven to this like dread of, oh no, what if I get left behind? One, like I remember being like 12 or 13, like going to bed, envisioning like accidentally getting left behind because I forgot to ask forgiveness for some sin. And then I'd have to, take the mark of or refuse the mark of the beast and get my head chopped off, because there are all these Left Behind movies and Left Behind books that said, if you didn't take the mark of the beast, you'd get your head chopped off. But you had to have the mark of the beast in order to get food and shelter. It was a whole thing. But,
this all like I'm listening to this and just I'm starting to stress out a little bit. I can't even imagine living in that. It had to, because it seems like there's just like this thing looming over you at all points in time where just you don't know if you're doing right or wrong. And if you don't get it right, then you're going to get your head chopped off. Like, do you just live in a constant feeling of stress?
Yes, but you don't realize it until you're out of it.
Okay.
Like you kind of, it's just normal. It's just I also, on the other side, if I wasn't anxious about being left behind, I would pray and ask God, to not come back until I could have sex on my wedding night, because I was waiting.
Right.
Because you had to, or you'd also go to hell for that. So many things. But I will say, I think there is this like it's miserable. You basically are kind of putting yourself in this prison. If I had questions like, well, why do we think this? Or why do we do this? I'd be met with like my Sunday school teacher being like, no, don't ask too many questions. Because you ask too many questions, one day you're going to wake up an atheist and then you're going to go to hell. So you just kind of learn to tuck away any logical, innate thoughts that you have and just keep pushing. And then everyone around you seems, or at least acts like, they know beyond a shadow of doubt that like this is the truth. So it just reinforces you to like, well, I don't want them to think I'm not spiritual enough, and I don't have like blind faith is like praised and encouraged as like a sign of being holy. So you learn to kind of keep quiet about any doubts that you would have.
Yeah, my best friend has been in a process of deconstruction actually like pretty recently, and she said that she would get into a lot of trouble for asking questions. Like you were not meant to ask questions. Why can't you ask questions?
Because they don't have the answers. Because quickly when you ask too many questions, you realize, well, this doesn't make sense with this. Like even just the belief that the Bible is inerrant. I believe that. Even though clearly there are contradictions in the Bible.
Yes.
But when you're in it, you're like, no, that's just a small thing. Like that's trivial. That doesn't count. Like it's still inerrant and it's God's holy word. And so, you don't want, and also when you're in these groups, it's your whole community. Sometimes it's your entire family. It's everybody you know. So you have a high risk of asking questions because, I remember people leaving the church. They were always the ones being demonized as like, oh, the devil got to them. Don't be like them. They were always put on as examples of what not to be. And, you're like, oh, I don't want to be a backslider, which is what they would call people that like left the faith.
Backslider?
Yeah, backslide. Like you backslide from the faith.
It just seems like there's an answer for everything that keeps you unaccountable for your own actions.
Yes, they have answers, but if you look too closely, the answers don't actually make sense.
So it seems like keeping you silent and not asking questions stops you from rocking the status quo in there, and they don't have to answer for things. So you stay, essentially it keeps you subservient to the leaders.
Yes, it's a way that they keep control and keep their numbers up and stay in power. Demonizing anybody that leaves, like, it's just, you don't want to be evil. You don't want to be a backslider. You don't want to be a doubting Thomas or a Jezebel.
Man, they have names for everything. Yeah. Doubting Thomas, Jezebel, heretic. Like and you probably get bombarded with that. So it seems like a lot of it also has to do with you don't want to be removed from the community like I had a viewer of mine who was Jehovah's Witness, but gay, and that's not allowed. So he came out and he had a choice. I could come out and be true to who I am. he ended up homeless when he did that, or I could bury everything that I am and just adhere to what they. So it seems like it's about power, but it's also about the looming idea of you no longer having the community that you always grew up in.
Yes. No, that it's all of the above, because it's just high risk, because I mean, I've lost a lot of community just by coming out that I voted Democrat,
No.
Which is one of the worst things you could do.
Which is so wild, because why are religions so involved with politics? Why are they one and the same, or were they always one and the same?
I mean, I think you see it being one and the same a lot throughout world history.
I mean, the separation of church and state is a joke. It's never been true.
Yeah.
It's just never been true.
Yeah, no. Well, because it is so much easier to rally a base around God is on our side, or the devil is on the side of the other. If you can make it about good versus evil, it is so much easier to get people fired up and passionate.
Yeah.
And that's what you need in politics. I mean, outrage, political leaders thrive off of outrage from both sides.
But it's really fear. I think that's what I think it's a tool of religion, tool of politics is fear. Tool of media is fear. If you're fearful, you stay subservient because you don't want to.
Oh yeah.
You don't want to be hurt. You don't want any of these bad things to happen. And I noticed that with a lot of conservative politics, conservative news. It's a war on everything. It's always a war on this, a war on that. It has to be really, your brain has to be under so much stress if you constantly feel like you're at war, or do they find it empowering? I'm confused. Like, it's just like everything is so extreme that I can't even look at it sometimes. I can't even imagine being in it.
Yes. It is exhausting. And again, you don't realize how exhausting it is until you're out of it, because you don't know anything else. Like, I'll give you an example. So another thing that, I had been taught growing up is that if I were to come across someone who is not a Christian and I did not witness to them or share the gospel in some way to them, that if they were to die and go to hell, not being a Christian, their blood would be on my hands, that I would be held accountable for once I get to heaven, which I would still go to heaven, but like my mansion wouldn't be as big,
Oh, well, in that case.
Yeah. So like if I met someone who was agnostic, or even Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, because in my circle, those were cults, because there's a lot of infighting as well.
Lord.
So it'd be like, if someone told me, oh, I went and had a beer the other night, even if they're over 21, internally, my brain would be like, oh, do I say something? Do I tell them that like that's a slippery slope that can send them to hell eventually? Do I stay silent and risk their blood being on my hand? It's just like this constant, your brain can never turn off, because you're not only at war with everything outside, you're at war with yourself. You're at war with your instincts, because you have to basically shut those down in order to keep perpetuating a lot of these talking points.
That's a cult.
Yeah.
That's a cult. Like what you're describing, I've interviewed people who were part of cults. They did the exact same thing. It was the exact same form of control in a cult as it is in what you're describing in religion.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely a lot of cult-like tendencies.
It's very similar.
Yeah, and it's this very specific, because there's versions of Christianity that are not like this,
right.
And that's something that I've been exploring and finding like, oh my gosh, this is the faith is so much bigger than what I was told it was.
Yes.
But when you're in it, you just don't think about you don't realize how much of your life is controlled by fear. You don't realize that you're actually living in a prison. And I actually believe that one of the reasons why there's so much hatred against queer people fought by like American Christianity is because they are seeing people who have freed themselves, who are living as their authentic selves and are happy. And happiness is a huge trigger to people when you're unhappy. Like we say we have the joy of the Lord, and that, and I'm not saying you're like miserable, but it's an exhausting existence to constantly, like, if someone who's not a Christian is successful and seems happy, then you say, well, there's pleasure in sin for a season, but their time's coming, because we are taught to deny ourselves, to deny our desires, because our desires are inherently sinful and that we are inherently evil. So we cannot trust ourselves. And that, takes a toll.
It's a crab in the bucket situation. They don't want to see anyone else thrive, but they do it under the guise of religion.
Right. Well, misery loves company. And if I'm miserable, how dare you be happy?
Oh, well, can't wait to hang out with those people. So you obviously, without vocalizing, had questions about your upbringing as you were growing up.
Yes.
At what point did the questions you had in your brain start to become vocalized?
Sure. So it was a slow stream of questions that I kind of little by little started pushing the envelope a little bit. I mean, I was already rebellious because I believed women could be preachers, and I believed that
How dare you?
Women didn't have to submit to their husbands, that
How dare
that they
you?
could be equal partners. So I was always a little bit on the edge. So I was not new, pushing the envelope was not foreign to me. But I would say like the first time that I really started questioning the goodness of the Christians around me, because, I'd always been taught we are good. We are the good guys. Was like 2011. So 12 years ago. My dad, who is this, big preacher, evangelist, got cancer and then died. And we were Pentecostal, so we believed in healing. And, so it never even crossed our mind that he would die. God was going to heal him. And even though it was stage 4 lung cancer, it was like a rare form, non-smokers. We had all these people rallying around us, helped us pray. But, God didn't heal him. He died. And I knew that I could not have believed anymore that God was going to heal my dad. Like, I knew, like, my faith was strong. And I had several Christians come to me and my family that said it couldn't just be that God just didn't answer our prayer. There had to be a reason that God wouldn't answer our prayer. And so we were blamed. We had some kind of unresolved sin in our family. My dad was living out of God's will. There were all of these like excuses that people would say to our face.
That had to been enraging. I'm getting pissed listening.
Yeah, no, I was so pissed. Or we'd be gaslit into saying like, which honestly, this one pissed me off more. When they'd be like, no, God did heal your dad. He got his ultimate healing in heaven. And I think I recognized like these were similar things that I had said in the past on, various situations where I couldn't explain why God allowed, this bad thing to happen. And it was just like, holy crap, I am so pissed. And I started just being like more introspective of like, this is how I've sounded. And this is so hurtful and not loving in any way. So that was the first thing. And so I immediately started questioning like my Pentecostal name it and claim it. Like God will just heal you in regard, like no matter what you ask for, as long as you have enough faith. Like that went out the window. And so I started questioning that out loud some, which the Baptists were like, yeah, we agree. It's a weird mix of different denominations. But yeah. And then the second thing that happened where I started questioning out loud was one of my brothers actually came out to me as gay in 2015, and it was a homophobic household, just like any, white conservative Christian family back then, or just conservative Christian. And, he had begged God to make him straight. And I'd been told that God will heal you if you're gay. It's a demon. If you have homosexual tendencies, that's some kind of demonic influence on your life that you just need to rebuke and Jesus will make you straight. But
Yeah.
I also knew my brother, and I knew that there's no way growing up in our household where like sometimes we'd be in a restaurant. If our waiter was gay, my dad would be like, we're leaving.
Wow.
So like, there's no way Andrew would, choose, quote unquote, that's my brother, to be gay in that household, which we thought, was just a choice. So then I just started like, I was not necessarily affirming and like championing of queer people at that time, but I was like, I know it's not a choice. And so I would just be like, hey, church, maybe we should stop being so hateful towards these people. There's so much that I think we don't understand.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, they didn't like that.
I can't imagine they didn't. Yeah.
So yeah, and then it's been a consistent thing. Like my spouse is
Non-binary.
Non-binary. Yeah.
I saw that. I was like, whoa, we are really going like to the other side of all of this.
Oh, yeah, I know. And it's so funny to me because Jesus has never said anything about non-binary people or trans people.
The language probably didn't even exist.
No. But the people that spew their scripture at me, like they like to use Jesus when he talks about, it's Jesus, I think it's Matthew 19. He quotes the creation story in Genesis. So he's quoting it where it says God created man and women, but the whole passage is talking about divorce and how you shouldn't divorce. And these people are using, I've had dozens, more than that, of, if you include the comments, but just dozens of messages that of Christians basically, I think they like want me to divorce my spouse because they're non-binary.
Yeah.
But they're using a scripture that's actually condemning divorce.
Can you describe what your existential crisis was like as you separated yourself from the ideas that you've been taught your whole life?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Oh, it's so hard. That's why, like, and especially too, because my dad had died. So there was this sense of like me betraying him, betraying his memory. There's like grief involved with it. But also it's a wide range of emotions because when I felt angry that people had lied to me. I don't believe anyone intentionally lied to me, but I still was taught things as absolute truth that were not absolute. I have a lot of guilt because I perpetuated this narrative that I now know to be false, and caused a lot of harm and hurt a lot of people in the process. My own brother being one of them. There's that. And then there's this yearning to like, I have to fix it. I have to like be vocal and loud and try to undo the things that I've been taught. And then there's also this like, I just want to sink in a hole and never talk to anyone again because I don't know how to process. It's just scary because I will say the good thing, it's not good, but the thing I think that draws people into being like a Christian nationalist or to living in a very fundamentalist worldview is that you do have the answers. You have certainty and you don't have to think about hard things, which can be hard. You have hope and that, when I die, I'm going to go to heaven. And it's just, you have the answers to things, even though they don't make sense, but you do have answers. And there's this like security in that.
Yeah.
And when suddenly you're faced with a whole world of beliefs and ideologies and different ways of looking at things, it's overwhelming because suddenly you have to make decisions. Before, other people were making all those decisions for you. And now you actually have to look at hard things. Like, why do bad things happen in the world? Why are children trafficked? Would a good God allow these things? Things that you never had to worry about before because you could just wrap it up in, well, God's ways are above our own. But now you have to really wrestle with, is this this version of God I've been taught actually good? And
that has to rock you. That has to your foundation, because that's what it is. It's the foundation of everything you've thought your whole life. The process has to be really painful and extensive of unraveling that and starting to question things.
Oh, it absolutely is. It's earth shattering. Your entire world is basically crumbling all around you. And at the same time, you can't really talk to anybody about it because everyone else is still in that mindset. And if you bring it up, you are demonized. So not only is your world crumbling apart, but you're losing your community and you're being the bad guy in the process. But, like deconstruction, there's so many pastors that demonize deconstruction as this, like, it's the cool thing to do. It's the sexy thing to do. It's just like all the cool kids are doing it. But in reality, like no one would ever choose to deconstruct and go through this because you just kind of hit a point where you have no choice but to deconstruct. If you have like the integrity to realize I can't go back because I've seen too many things that I know that's wrong. And so then you're just either stuck to like, I can either just be frozen here for the rest of my life, unable to move, or I have to, charge down this new path of uncertainty and into the unknown and just hope for the best, hope that I survive this. But which I have, and it's much better being on this side of it, but it's really terrifying.
So if people are walking down that path of like deconstructing or challenging their ideas about the religion they're brought up or conservatism or whatever, where do they find resources to help them through that process? Like, where did you find support on your process?
Sure. So I initially had to read Christian authors, like progressive Christian authors, because, I just felt like I couldn't listen to an atheist quite yet. But there's lots of podcasts like finding, affirming LGBTQ pastors, like honestly, just learning about other versions of Christianity, like Christianities that do include queer people, those types of denominations, I think is a good baby step to like progress. And, I know some people leave the faith, some people stay in the faith. But also like the internet is a good tool to TikTok was really what gave me the courage to dive in, because the way the algorithm works, it kind of forces you into like-minded people and, types of content. And so you can learn a lot from people who are deconstructing out loud, because it can be a very isolating and lonely experience, especially if the majority of the people around you are still in it. There's podcasts like The Bible for Normal People is a podcast done where they don't believe the Bible is inerrant, and it just like explains like actual cultural context of different books of the Bible and scripture in the Bible that we were taught had to be this way. But then it's like, no, it's actually like this. And there's like all these different interpretations of this scripture. So I would say like to not like initially when I started deconstructing, I felt like I had to have all the answers right away because I was used to having answers. And so not having answers was terrifying and not ideal. So I felt like, okay, well, what do I believe on this? If I don't believe this, which I know this is wrong now, what do I believe? And so initially it was this, like, I had this tendency where like I had to have, still answers for everything. But then I realized, no, that's just because I have not unlearned the black and white way of thinking where everything has to have a black or white answer. And so I think the best thing that I've learned is that there's so much nuance to everything, and most things are not on a binary. Most things are a spectrum, and learning to not know and being comfortable in that is a tall task, but that has brought so much peace to my life, and just being like, I will never know the answer to that question, and that's okay.
I don't even know that I'm okay with that, and I wasn't even brought up religious. So I was like, I need to know. But maybe that comes from a place of anxiety, which would be something that the church would cause within you.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously some things that you can know, like racism is bad, and queer people deserve human rights, and
what?
Like there's things that definitely have answers. There's right and wrong for sure, but like the wrong now, like what I would say, like sin, the idea of sin, I was taught that's just like oh, when you eat a cookie you weren't supposed to, or if you think about sex a little too much. But in reality, I would say something that's harmful if it harms someone else or yourself, like that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, live your life.
Yeah. So condolences on your dad. He passed away. Is your mom still around?
She is. She actually lives in my neighborhood.
Okay. So did you get, like, after you started to make your content and started to deconstruct, did you still have a relationship with her? Did you get more of a relationship with your brother?
Yeah. So I've been fortunate in that. So my mom is like one of the sweetest people. And she kind of, when she was with my dad, obviously she believed all of the same things, but my dad was very much the decision maker. So my mom didn't really have a huge voice in the relationship. She just kind of went along with whatever my dad did.
It's
And so,
patriarchal.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So since he passed, she's been able to wrestle with things. And honestly, her son, my brother, coming out as gay was a huge eye opener for her. She also didn't like Trump. She voted for him in 2016, but she came out and was like, "Oh, I can't believe I did that." And I was like, "You didn't have to." She's lost friends over it because she didn't understand the Christian love for Trump either. Because I'll say, like, one thing that my parents had growing up that I didn't necessarily see, or that I don't see a lot in like Christian nationalism today, is they were like genuinely good people underneath it all, and like wanted to help people, and believed that what they were doing was good, and they did do good in the middle of it. Like that's also where I have to find nuance too, is like I don't think every single Christian nationalist is like evil, like all consumingly. There's nuance in all of this, but we get so outraged that it can be hard to see the humanity in everybody.
Yeah.
And I think being raised the way that I was, and the way that my parents always taught me, like, seek truth even if it's uncomfortable. And so I think having that foundation was like, my dad was basically a feminist and told me, like, don't ever let a man like try to control my life, and to get my career started first before I got married so that I wouldn't play second fiddle to him. So they're like oddly like little progressive things and with my family that weren't in the larger point. I don't know if I'm making
How is he teaching you that, but then not demonstrating it?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Like, that's a major dissonance right there from what you described your household was like.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I don't think he even recognized. And he never told me, like, that was just how my parents' marriage worked, because my mom was taught, she needed to be the submissive role, and it was never overtly said. It was just done. Yeah. But I always felt empowered by my dad, and I didn't want to have a relationship. Like, I wanted to have the love that they had, but I didn't want to be a doormat,
Yeah.
So, and I think my mom, when someone dies, over time, you're able to kind of look back at your life and see things a little differently than if they were still alive and you were still in it. And so she was definitely concerned early on for my salvation a little bit, especially when I started questioning hell. But she actually went to a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests with me, and she's like pretty much on board. Like, she's fully supportive and affirming of queer people now. And, I would say I've been very fortunate that I have a mom that would, she would not necessarily debate me, but she had concerns, but we would talk about it. And, she would come up to me with all these fears that we had both been taught of, like, oh no, we don't question this. We don't question this. And so she would say all the same kind of tired tropes, but she would actually, to her credit, like, listen to me and my heart, and eventually went on the journey with me.
Yeah. It sounds like your ability to do deconstruction now is partially because you had at least semi-progressive parents that would allow you to have those ideas without trying to stifle them, or at least be willing to have a discussion, which is what I've always hoped for. Like, in any of these discussions, especially as this white het male, like entering these spaces and having these conversations, I recognize my privilege in that. And I recognize that a lot of people just like me are the cause of a lot of these issues. But I think it also allows me less emotionality when I have these discussions. Someone who's more directly affected by it might get angry, but really I'm just trying to, I think what I noticed in general, and this is not just specifically on one side or the other, is we're talking to make the person like us, not talking to exchange ideas. And, walking into a conversation, like when I was talking to someone who is bigoted, they have a lifetime. Something people need to remember is like they've had a lifetime of thinking that way to cause them to act the way that they are. And I don't excuse their behavior. But if you think one conversation with you is going to change that, then you're arrogant as well. It should be about an exchange of ideas. And then you just hope. Down the road, that they're going to use that information, but they can't claim ignorance anymore.
Yeah, no.
I'm assuming that in these discussions, you get quite a lot of feedback from Christian people who are currently Christian evangelicals or white nationalists or any of those things. What are some common phrases that people say to you in reaction to the content that you make?
Repent. Turn or burn. Jesus
turn
is coming.
Or burn?
Yeah, like turn to Jesus or burn in hell.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. There are people that get really get off on the idea of me burning in hell. You'll regret this one day, but put crying, laughing emojis, or enjoy the lake of fire and put
sounds
LOL.
Very, very godly.
So loving. Yeah. They really want me to burn. Yeah. I mean, I've been told that I have a demon just simply because I'm a redhead. My favorite though, actually, I think one of my favorite comments that I received, someone called me the the soulless reincarnation of the fallen Nephilim.
What is a Nephilim?
I'm pretty sure they're like the hold on. I want to make sure I have this right. Nephilim in the Bible were like the giants. Yeah, they were the giants of the Hebrew Bible.
If you're going to insult someone, make sure it's not such a niche thing that you're saying to them. It's like, I want to be either happy or mad, but I don't know what you just said.
Yeah, no, it was actually, I had appreciated the creativity because it's the only time I've gotten that one. But I get called a demonic, and I'm a tool of Satan. I'm Satan's child. One time I got called the Antichrist. Been called
Congratulations.
I know. It's progressive of them to think that the Antichrist would be female.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a hodgepodge of just ridiculousness. I get a lot of scripture. And then there's the people that try to come in, saying truth and love, like, I love you as a sister in Christ, but.
Okay, it's just not true. You're just, anything you said before but doesn't matter, because I know what you're actually. Do they ever get to you? Does it ever actually hurt your feelings, or are you just so above it at this point?
The ones that, sometimes if it's people I know, it can be a little hurtful. I have pretty thick skin, so it doesn't, if it's attacking me personally, I don't mind it as much. I do get more upset when they bring my children into it or my spouse, because I'm just very protective of them. And I know
they didn't sign up for that.
Right. They didn't, they're not the ones making the videos. They're, I talk about them, but they're not, it just seems like a low blow. So I get a little upset about that. And I had one person that when Beecher came out, Beecher's my spouse,
yes.
Non-binary. I had a bunch of people that were like, oh, you married a gay. Now y'all are just lesbians. And they
and
don't
the transgenders.
I know. Them transgenders. They don't understand that sexuality and gender
identity are not the same
different.
Thing.
Yeah.
Well, I get how it's confusing because the T is connected to a bunch of other in LGBT is connected to sexuality. It's the only thing. The letters go on, but the original LGBT, it's sexuality, gender identity. It's still a very new discussion for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It's upsetting or frustrating when I take the time to explain gender and sexuality are two different things, and here's like why they're different. And then they're like, oh, so you're okay with homosexuality? Like that's like their comeback. I'm like, I mean, yes, I am okay with that, but that's not what I'm talking about.
I have a few questions from my Patreon people if you're down to answer those.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So if you guys ever want to ask questions to my guests, patreon.com/unfilteredfriends. Tara wants to know, do you still struggle with or did you struggle with anger surrounding your upbringing and your deconstruction?
Yes, absolutely. I still struggle with it. I'm not, especially because it's Pride Month right now, and
oh gosh,
they seem extra obnoxious this year.
Yeah.
Yes, I do get angry. One, I'm angry because I see the active harm that so many conservative Christians are still putting out into the world. But I honestly, if I'm like being really introspective around it, I think I'm most angry at myself and my past self for not waking up sooner.
How can you be angry at yourself for that though? Because it was what you were taught.
I know it's that
It's complicated.
Yeah, it's a very complicated, I can have grace for myself most days, but then some days I'm like, gosh, what an idiot. How did I not, but it is hard. Like, I don't think people understand. And also it doesn't help that sometimes I get comments of people being like, what an idiot. It took Trump to wake you up and blah, blah, blah. Like it's been a history.
It woke up a lot of people. I think what Trump did was bring the bigoted people to the light. They were always there. They were just quieter. And I feel like he emboldened them. So Trump's office was a majorly impactful time for people coming out of the woodwork and being like, I'm a hateful person.
Oh yeah. No, it was like you had all these very awful, like it's like you had worms in the foundation of American Christianity, and then you lit a fire underneath the ground, and everything came to the top.
Oh, I love a good visual. That actually helped me quite a bit.
But they were there. You just didn't see them.
They were always there.
Yeah.
I think during the George Floyd stuff, I think Will Smith said something like racism didn't just show up. It's just being filmed now.
Yeah.
So it's like it's becoming more bold. It's becoming more out there, but it's always been an issue.
Well, yeah. And then as white people, you're not going to put yourself intentionally into an uncomfortable situation and seek out racism that you're told doesn't actually exist. So you have to basically see it before your eyes. Yes. Unfortunately, it shouldn't be that way.
Brianna asks, what's your favorite skit that you've done? Like one that like really sticks out to you?
Oh gosh, my favorite one. Probably my favorite one. I mean, I've got a few, but I think was my response to Matt Chandler, who's a megachurch pastor in Texas. Yes. He was one of the pastors who went after deconstruction, and he said that deconstruction is sexy. And so I I stitched his clip of saying that, and I said, well, is deconstruction sexy? And then it basically turns into this like 90s late night sexy phone call commercial.
Those 1-900 numbers.
Yeah, it's like deconstruction. Existential crisis. And I'm like, it was really funny. My spouse is actually a filmmaker. So we put the white sheet up on the wall, and I was just like on the bed, like rolling around, just saying all these things of like, the rapture's not in the Bible. And, was everything I believed a lie? And trying to make it all sexy. I think that one's probably my favorite.
What made you choose humor when you talk about these things? Because you could have just been vocal and angry and say that stuff, but you're doing skits.
Yeah. I honestly don't know if it was a conscious decision initially. It was kind of my way of coping with the trauma, of like, this is going to make me just cry and completely crumble into despair unless I laugh about it. Because it's some of it's just ridiculous when you say it out loud. It's like, there is humor here. I mean, it's harming a lot of people. But I think as I continued on and people were like, why are you using humor? To me, humor has a way of, I think, connecting with people that wouldn't hear me say it outright
It's
if
more
they can,
palatable for
yeah,
people.
if they can see it and if they can see themselves in a sketch, it's easier than me just being like, hey, did you know that you're racist? It's me
Yeah.
giving an example of like, ha, look at me saying this. And then like, oh shoot, I see myself in that. Am I racist? It makes them ask themselves that question instead of me, directly pointing my fingers.
Yeah, you're not being like you're not accusing them of anything. You're just holding a mirror up to who they might be
Yes.
and letting them
Yes.
make the decision. Because I found that in a lot of these discussions with people who are opposite of you on a lot of issues, telling somebody what they need to do makes them resistant. But
Mm-hmm.
demonstrating or doing it in a way where they don't even recognize that that's what's happening helps them to grasp it themselves. It's like a visual. Some people are visual.
Mm-hmm.
No one likes being told what to do for the most part. Yeah.
No one likes it. And I think I've always had this kind of, self-deprecating humor too.
Mm-hmm.
And since was on that side, it's kind of, I look at it more of like making fun of my old self.
Yeah.
And it's easier that way because people like to be like, oh, you just hate Christians. You're just like church hater. You're persecuting the church. And I'm like, I'm just making fun of how I used to be.
Yeah.
And if you're seeing yourself in that,
that's your journey.
That's on you.
I didn't say anything to you. You're saying it to me. Annika wants to know, what do you teach your kids about religion?
Oof. So my kids I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so they're still pretty young. I haven't had to teach them like too in depth of things. What I teach them is, which is really outside of religion, but is to be kind to people, even if people are not nice to you. It's best to respond with kindness. I still believe in God. So I told them like, they know about God, they know about Jesus. And I think showing them like the positive sides of Christianity, of like, Jesus was this person who stood up to religious leaders who were hurting people. And that is something that is a good thing to do. If you see someone causing harm, it's good to stand up to those people, to stand up to bullies. So we try to frame it in like, how does this apply to our life now? They don't know. We've not taught them about Satan. They don't know anything about hell or the rapture or any of like the fear-based beliefs that I had been brought up with. I mean, as far as they know, I think everybody goes to heaven, which is,
yeah.
But they're just now, my oldest is just now getting to the age where she asks questions, like even a few weeks ago, she was just like, Mommy, how do we know Jesus is real? And I was like, I don't know that we really know that. We base it off of these historical accounts and people who were there and say that they saw him and they do these things. But like at the end of the day, we each have to choose what we believe based on the information at hand. And so I'm trying to empower them to make their own decisions in what they believe, but also being honest with what I believe when they ask me, but not being like, you have to think exactly how I think.
Yeah. If someone's listening to this and they are in their deconstruction path and they're trying to they're lost, they're trying to figure out what direction to go, what guidance would you have for someone who's at the beginning stages of that?
Sure. I would say take a breath. It's not a race to get through deconstruction, and know it might take a while. No, you're not alone. You're not the first person to have these thoughts. They're big, heavy thoughts. I would just say give yourself grace. Give yourself the grace that you wish the people who taught these things to you had given you all along.
I love that. So if people are inspired by you and they want to reach out, where's the best place for them to do that?
Sure. I'm on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook at AprilAjoy. My middle name's Ajoy, so AJOY. That's actually my middle name. So AprilAjoy. Or I'm on Twitter at AprilAjoyR, because AprilAjoy was taken and I'm not salty.
How dare.
I know.
How dare. I couldn't get Unfiltered Friends podcast either.
It's so mad. I'm like, it matches everywhere else.
I know. I've been doing social media for 16 years, and like it's impossible at this point to get usernames for pretty much anything
Yeah.
to be uniform.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you so much for this. This was fascinating. I'm definitely going to have to take a nap after this to process everything that just happened, so I can imagine what your process was like. But thank you for giving me your time, and thank you for being on Unfiltered Friends.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.